So I'm going to try and very briefly make a point by connecting two seemingly very contradictory thoughts. The first thought is an absolutely absurd statement made by a member of the US House of Representatives, and the second thought is some words that Paul wrote to the church in Colossae. So, first up, recently a member of the House of Representatives called Lauren Boebert was invited, for some extraordinary reason, invited to speak at a local church. I think it was down in Colorado. And this is just right on the aftermath of another tragic school shooting down in the US. And she proceeded to take the opportunity to make some commentary with some humor perhaps on American gun control and Jesus and the gospel in some sort of attempt to be funny or relevant, or I don't even know what she was trying to do. So the punchline of what she said was basically that if only Jesus had had some AR-15s, a little bit more American semi-automatic firepower, he would not have been crucified by the government. And she said this in a way to try and garner a laugh, but also to try and make a point of public policy from a platform of the gospel. Now, I couldn't even begin to describe the number of ways in which this is grotesque and absurd, and it is a circus of theological stupidity. It's also, unfortunately, blasphemous and actually dangerous to try and advocate that if only Jesus had been more violent, then he wouldn't have been crucified or wouldn't have had his life taken, is to miss so many points theologically, and also to create so many problems socially and culturally within an already unstable evangelical culture, that it is just baffling how a pastor could let this lady take the microphone and be blessed to address the congregation. I think first up the pastor should be fired, and then a whole lot of other circumstances need to follow. But this is perhaps just another glimpse at the theological bankruptcy of some corners of the North American church. Contrary to this, Paul, at the end of the letter to the Colossians, makes a pretty extraordinary statement about power and authority. It's very brief and it's not in great detail, but he gives us a glimpse into, I think, what he wants to try and do within the structure of family and employment and marriage within the church. He makes some comments that perhaps to us are fairly sort of normal Christian logic, but to his day would have been radically countercultural and counterintuitive for the people who were reading the letter. He talks very briefly about three power structures or authority structures within society: marriage, parents to children, and employment, masters to servants or even slaves. And he re-engineers them in a few short lines. He talks about how husbands have to love and respect and honour their wives. He talks about how fathers in particular do not exasperate your children, show patience. Right? There's this sense of love and tenderness. And even masters to their servants, he says, be just and be fair. And he challenges them to be a godly employer. Now, like I said, for us, this is fairly basic Christian common sense, but for the day, it would have been startling, because what it is doing is it is addressing the authority structures, the power structures of the day, which in those terms would have been very, very hierarchical and patriarchal. So a male-dominated society through and through, and all of it reinforcing each other in all of these different spheres. And here, the kingdom of God, the gospel of Jesus, the church, are to be the community in which that is not normal. That doesn't take place. There's something different going on. There is something new and gracious and exceptional that is happening. And what you can call it is powering down. So normal hierarchical structures power up. The power goes to the top and it stays at the top. Powering down is the dissemination of power from the top into the community for the betterment of others. Now, why does Paul want the church to power down? Simply because that's what God is like. God has absolute power, absolute authority, unrestrained capacity, and yet he demonstrates his unrestrained capacity by powering down, by becoming one of us. And Jesus even says, I didn't come to be served, I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom, to sacrifice. So at the heart of God and the gospel is this comprehensive self-giving out of a sense of love for the betterment of others, even when it costs God the Son, his very life on the cross. And that's why Paul exhorts the church not to copy the power structures of the community and the culture, but to radically reorient themselves around the self-giving of Jesus, so that those who would normally get the short end of the deal are actually the ones that get blessed. Those who would normally get all the praise and power are the ones that keep giving and giving and giving for the betterment, for the blessing of the other. Because that's the gospel shape of a culture and a community. And that's perhaps one reason why when I heard the comments by Lauren Boebert, it was so jarring and offensive that I wanted to make some kind of comment on it, because I normally don't pick out names and circumstances like this. But it also lays out a perfect case to make another beautiful observation about the gospel, which is, Jesus said, didn't he, that my kingdom is not of this world. He said, if it was, I could call an army and they would basically wipe the floor. He's saying, if I was a king like you, if I played by your rules, if I did power the way you do power, if I did authority and leadership the way you do, I could call my army would take care of everything for me. I'd have nothing to worry about. He comes with authority, with power, with love of another kind, of a higher kind, and challenges us to see that and to live in that and to reflect that and to manifest that inside our marriages, inside our families, inside our churches and inside our communities, where authority and power are not there to be used for self-protection and betterment and the distancing of others, but they're there to bless and to provide grace for others. Why? Well, because that's exactly what Jesus is like. Just one final thought on this is that I tracked down some of the response by some social media commentators on this story, and it was extraordinary because I actually was listening to and reading some atheist commentators and what they had to say about Lauren Boebert's Sunday speech, and they were more in tune with the purpose of the gospel, the nature of Jesus, and the turn the other cheek ethic of the kingdom than this self-professed evangelical was in this church service. And these atheists, they were as aghast as I think I am and we are, that something so profoundly offensive and wrong could dress up in its Sunday best and try and pass itself off as an acceptable thought in a church. So I just thought it's interesting that the strange state of the world that we're in right now is that when atheists are commentating on some gospel issues, they're sometimes closer to the truth than self-professed Christians. For what that's worth, I'll leave it with you. Till next time, peace.